years ago, A Charlie Brown Christmas premiered on network television, and with it, a staple of animation was born. All these years later, the special remains a tradition to appear on the airwaves, still airing primarily on ABC each year. That's a pretty big accomplishment when you know that the practice of preempting primetime TV for animated specials was done away with years ago, yet this is one of the few that networks will still find the time for. And naturally, I've gotten plenty of requests to review this special, though for the longest time, I wasn't really sure if I could. I mean, this definitely isn't a bad Peanuts special, and it certainly isn't an obscure one, so I'm not sure my traditional brand of snarky commentary can really apply to a classic like this. But perhaps I can still give my own insight as to why this special remains a beloved tale after so many years. So as my Christmas gift to you, let's finally look at A Charlie Brown Christmas. Since I think everyone pretty much knows the story of this special, I don't think a full play-by-play of the show is really needed. Instead, we'll focus on the bigger and more noticeable spots in this special, and try to figure out what exactly they mean toward the message this story actually is meant to deliver. The first one being Charlie Brown telling Linus how he doesn't seem to be happy around Christmas time. He admits to liking the material aspects, like setting up decorations and getting presents, but yet he can't seem to feel that extra spark that makes everyone so, well, jolly around the holidays. Why is this? Well, it seems the show suggests that his spirit has been deadened somewhat by the over-commercialization of the holiday, but maybe it's a bit more than that. Perhaps it's because Charlie spends much of the year up to this point feeling ostracized and alone. I mean, he does appear to have friends and people he hangs out with, but he still seems to feel like he's never really a part of anything. And because of this, being a part of the Christmas spirit isn't something he can just turn on automatically. And this is probably reflective not just of Charlie Brown, but of Charles Schulz as well. I've pointed this out before, but the one thing that I regret in past reviews is not realizing just how much Charlie was meant to be a representation of Schulz's own insecurities. The man did have a hard time for much of his life believing that he was liked and appreciated, and that was shown in the earlier versions of his comics. He never enjoyed putting his main character through such torment all the time. What the other characters thought of Charlie represented what he thought others thought of him. At any rate, it seems that Charlie Brown has a tough time getting into the spirit of togetherness when he's not involved in something. And amazingly, the one person who actually steps up and gives him an opportunity to be involved in something is Lucy. Though this might not be as shocking if you remember when this came out. While she was still a crabapple, Lucy in the earlier years of the strip was not really Charlie Brown's main antagonist. That role at first went to Violet, who was more of an elitist snob toward him rather than someone actively trying to torment him. That's not to say Lucy didn't have her own confrontations in the early days. She was always confrontational with her brother Linus, but mostly her biggest antagonistic relationship may have been with Snoopy. And yes, often at times, Snoopy is the instigator in their little skirmishes, but one, it's always fun to see Lucy get tormented, and two, Snoopy always still comes out on top because he's a beagle, not a fighter.
I've been kissed by a dog. I have dog germs. Get hot water, get some disinfectant, get some iodine.
So Lucy gives Charlie Brown the position of directing their upcoming school Christmas play. And to be honest, I've always kind of been a bit confused about this scene in particular when he's attempting to try to direct the other kids. I mean, you can get the idea from watching them just dance around doing their own thing that they definitely don't seem to respect Charlie Brown, but I'm not really sure how this in particular, these repeated shots of them dancing around to Vince Guaraldi's Linus and Lucy, really seems to indicate that these kids aren't into the spirit of Christmas. I'm not even sure how this particular number is supposed to connect to the Christmas play. It just comes off more of the fact that they're not focused at all, period, rather than they're not focused on Christmas and what it's supposed to truly mean, which seems to be what Charlie Brown is trying to find out for himself more than anything else. So he decides that as the director, it's his responsibility to help set the proper mood for this show, and that the way to do it is to get a Christmas tree for their play.
That's it, Charlie Brown. You get the tree. Get the biggest aluminum tree you can find, Charlie Brown. Maybe paint it pink.
Yeah, it may surprise a lot of younger people nowadays, but that was actually a thing when this show first came out. Artificial trees have had a place for a long time for various reasons, but starting around 1958, trees literally made out of aluminum and in different colors were a pretty popular item. Amazingly, it's believed that the ridicule of this phenomenon in this special actually caused the appeal of them to plummet so far that they were pretty much gone from the market by the time the 60s were over. Maybe the Peanuts movie should have had Lucy say she was a fan of the Kardashians. And that, of course, leads to the next big question. Why does Charlie Brown pick this particular tree? Of course, the most common and immediate belief is that this is supposed to be another example of how he's a failure, how he can't realize what was expected of him. But is it really that? Or is it perhaps that Charlie sees something in this tree? Small, frail, and dwarfed by all the other more majestic trees, maybe he sees a bit of himself in this one, and thus feels it needs to be taken in. And in this one small move, we begin to see that Charlie Brown has known the true meaning of Christmas all along. He just hasn't realized it so far. Of course, that isn't immediately recognized by most of the other kids, and they naturally ridicule him for picking it out.
What a tree!
I guess you were right, Linus. I shouldn't have picked this little tree. Everything I do turns into a disaster. I guess I really don't know what Christmas is all about. Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
And now we get to the big moment of the show, when Linus recites the Gospel of Luke to explain what Christmas is really all about. I'm sure there are a ton of devout Christians out there that use this scene in particular to really try and slam home their own message, but maybe it's a bit more far-reaching than that. I actually did as much research as I could about the history of winter holidays, and it ultimately comes down to this. Celebrations around the winter solstice have existed in many different cultures, and while the traditions vary, they are almost all centered around the same theme of the ending of darkness and the hope of a brighter future. And this is why pretty much all such celebrations focus on togetherness and goodwill. So even if you aren't a devout Christian, Linus's words can still have a meaning for you if you see them for their deeper intent that can cross all cultural boundaries. At any rate, it's just what Charlie Brown needs to hear, because as long as one person can honestly deliver that message to him, it gives him the hope that there is still something about Christmas worth keeping pure. And in seeing Charlie stick to this one act of goodwill, even towards just a small plant, it gives the kids themselves the ability to see the true spirit as well. And thus, when he finds himself despondent over apparently not being able to fulfill his dream, they all show up in the end to pay back what he ultimately did for them.
What's going on here?
It's a simple yet extremely heart-filled message from every other member of the Peanuts gang that Charlie Brown does truly belong. And perhaps it's a message that Charles Schulz needed to tell himself in delivering that message via this final scene. A scene that can deliver that powerful message to just about anyone then or today that needed to hear it. A message that can still ring true 50 years later to anyone who wonders what Christmas is truly about and whether or not they truly feel like they are a part of the holiday spirit. And therein lies the #1 reason why A Charlie Brown Christmas remains so beloved to this day, because it is in every way timeless. It reminds us that everything we think Christmas gets mistaken for and the struggles to remember what it's really all about still existed 50 years ago. The commercialization and cynicism about the holidays has always existed, but in the end, the spirit of goodwill towards everyone does ultimately win out. And in fact, the special itself really reflects on its own story. Made in less than 6 months on a $96,000 budget, the producers and CBS network originally feared the project would be a failure due to its unorthodox approach at the time of using child actors for the voices, Vince Guaraldi's music for the soundtrack, and the lack of a laugh track. But none of that mattered when people recognized it for the message it meant to send and how simply it was done. And that simplicity is why it still works today like it did in 1965. Nowadays, many other Christmas specials and movies try to ridicule and criticize the commercialization of the holidays, but they just do it way too over the top in slamming their message at us. And they just aren't able to deliver what they are supposedly trying to say like this special did with its simplicity and honesty. And it's those traits that continue to make A Charlie Brown Christmas not just one of the most beloved holiday specials of all time, but almost certainly the most beloved Peanut special of all time. And of course, the success of A Charlie Brown Christmas led to many more Charlie Brown animated specials in the years to come. But not just animated specials, as eventually it all led to Charlie Brown finally making his way to episodic television, which we'll get into next week on TV Trash.